Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about deformers. Many of you in class the other day will remember we talked about some of them. I think we were going on a little long, and I felt like it was probably a better opportunity to teach this through a video where you can comb back through it and see, because we're going to have to use these to solve problems in animation, because sometimes you don't get the opportunity to just get a fully animated, ready, or a fully rigged, ready to go character or object to animate. You have to actually put some slight rigging on it yourself. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the different deformers that we can use to do that. Now, by far one of the biggest deformers that is used is skeletons and skinning. Okay, so we can create a joint tool. If I go to my front view, as we saw how this worked before, I'm just going to hold down X to lock that to there, hold down Shift, and you'll see that I can insert joints. Okay, now these joints are just pivot points that are going to be used to define how these vertices on this object will deform. So if I select them both, I go Skin and Smooth Bind, and you'll see that what I get is when I animate the bone, I get, let's try that again. Oh, I bet I have Skin, Smooth Bind. I'm going to go to Edit and reset my settings to the default because I had it set to something different. Bind Skin, and so now you'll see that if I select one of the joints, I can use that to deform this. And these are animatable points. I can animate each of these in this hierarchy. Now the difference, this isn't a fully rigged character. This isn't a rig. A rig is this is a deformer. A joint is a deformer. A rig is a setup that allows you to interact with these deformers in a very intuitive way for animation. But sometimes you just don't have time for that. Sometimes it's like it's not worth spending a day rigging something when you just need to animate 20 frames of something bouncing and squashing, right? And so this is a very basic way that we can do that. And if we have to, and this is very I'll reiterate, have to, we can animate directly on these joints, right? And so I can go through here and curl this and get, animation on this. Okay. Joints are one of the basic ways that we usually will see animation on a character and a deformation from a character. So I'm going to go to Skin, Detach Skin. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this skeleton, because bones, although, actually let me undo that. I want to show you one more thing on this. Something that you've probably seen already, but if I go to Skin, I can do Paint Skin Weights tool. You can also right click on the mesh and get to this, and you'll see what this will allow us to do is paint the influence of these joints. So right now the second joint up, joint 2, is only influencing the area that is white, and so as we start to fall toward black, black is not being influenced at all. And so I can replace with a value of 1 my influence here. Okay. And so that's going to, actually let's do that in a different way. Let's go to joint 5, or joint 4, which is only really influencing the top, and paint some influence down here. And you'll be able to see that if I now go and animate joint 4, that area is going to be influenced as well. Okay, so that's how we can kind of refine what is going to be influenced by each of these joints. So let's go now Skin, Detach Skin. I'm going to delete these joints. Sometimes joints are not the answer. Sometimes it's actually more than what you need, or will require more animation than what you need. And so let's look at some of these other deformers that we can use. So the first one I'm going to look at is the non-linear deformers, and these have a lot of different options to them. So we have Bend, and if I select the object and hit Bend, you'll see that I get this input on my model that allows me to adjust the curvature of my bend. Now here's the thing, is if I grab my cylinder now though and I animate it away, whoa, it's all terrible and wonky, right? Because there's my bend handle, there's my cylinder, and I'm moving my cylinder away from my bend handle. Okay, so if I need that bend handle to stay with it, I can actually parent it underneath my cylinder. And now it will go with me, and I still get the option to animate this bend and this curvature. And now I can do some interesting things with this. I can extend my low bound down further, and I could even move my bend handle down further if I want to, right? And extend the high bound higher. Right? And so what that's going to give us is this option to kind of get this sort of curling on it, right? All of these things are animatable, right? I can animate this curvature. I can animate this bend handle that is underneath it. If I animate it rotating, we can get this sort of this twirly shape, right? And so let's think what we could do if we animated those at the same time. Let's animate the curvature. Key selected. Let's set this out here longer. I'm going to set that, keyframe that again there, and say at 50, curve it down to there. So we got that. But then if I animated the bend handle on top of that, rotating in 360 degrees, right, let's do negative 360, 360, right. Oh, I guess I needed to change my frame first, didn't I? Let's just go ahead and set that back to 0. Set that to negative 360. And so what we'll get is this animation, right? And so I did that with very few keyframes, right? And so that's just something to consider of the different things that you can actually achieve with these. I'm going to go ahead and set this back to 0. Actually, that's not really where I wanted it. I wanted it a little higher. And just look at a couple of these others. We got flare. Flare is going to give us the option to sort of flare parts of this in and out. We have sine. Sine is an interesting one because we can do a wave, and then we can do an offset through it, right? And so this may be something that you would apply to like a fish or something as it's swimming through the water. You may be able to use that to get just a basic deformation on it. We can add a twist to this object. Squash and stretch, obviously, it takes a little bit of playing with it to get it to squash and stretch from the ground. You'll have to adjust the high and the low bound, but you'll be able to figure that part out if you have to do that. We got a twist, which you may not really notice unless you're looking at wireframe, that we can twist the top and the bottom, and so there's tons of different deformers we can use on these nonlinear deformers. Now, sometimes we need some overall shape changes to our object. Okay, so one of these we've already sort of talked about briefly, which is a blend shape. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this object, move it over to the side, right, and I'm going to do a very specific change to this. Right, let's say that I need this to do that and that, right, and for this to do that. Okay. Now I didn't add any vertices, and I can't add any vertices in this to, if I do, it just won't work. But let's say that's the shape we're wanting to get, right? I'm going to select the first object, select the second object. In fact, let's go ahead and do another one just to show you sort of the power here. Keep in mind I'm editing this on the vertex level, not on the model level itself. Let's go ahead and do one more. Control D. Let's give it a wide base. And I'll turn on soft select for this one, just so we get some automatic fall off. Let's scale that up. There we go. That's maybe not necessarily what I wanted, but that'll work. Okay. So what I can do is I can select these as long as I'm selecting the final object last. Doesn't really matter which order. And if I hit the blend shape option, you'll see I now get a new blend shape input here, and you'll see that the names of these, P2, P3, P4, are all listed in here as a blend shape. Now I can hide these or even delete these, and it doesn't really matter. If I delete them, the blend shapes will still work. Right? And the interesting thing is they work additively. So if I add this one, I can still add this one on top of it, and this one on top of it. Okay, so this is a combination of all three of them, and I can take those in and out. Right. It's a very powerful way of getting some deformations on this object. And you can do this after you've deleted the blend shapes. However, if you don't delete the blend shapes, you can still make changes to this that will affect the final model. Okay. So that's something to consider as a way of creating different specific deformations. So let's go ahead and at any point that we want to just take this back to the original model, I basically just have to delete history, and you'll see that it will wipe away any inputs. Right. So let's talk about, this one feels a little obsolete at times, but it's actually still pretty nice. It's a cluster. And so a cluster is a point that will influence multiple vertices, but it's kind of like a bone that is standalone. So if I just click on cluster while I have those vertices selected, you'll see that now when I animate this cluster handle, all those points come with it. Now the nice thing about that is I can still go into edit deformers, and I can paint my cluster weights. And in fact, most of these deformers I can animate or I can paint their weights on them as well. So I can still go in here and I can flood smooth this. And so now when I animate this cluster handle, you'll see that I get this nice bubbly shape that I get an animation control on, right? So if I need to have something feel like it's denting, I can just, we see this a lot, like somebody takes a step in the snow, and when they take the step, we just need to animate that dipping in and just changing the mesh. So that's a nice way of doing that, although a blend shape would also do something very similar. Okay? And again, well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the last thing I'm going to show you, the last two things I want to show you is a lattice and a jiggle deformer. So the lattice is actually used more for modeling, but it's just this cage that goes around our object, and we have these points that we can animate on it, or that we can move on it, right? The interesting thing is we can also animate these points. Okay. The hard part about that is that we don't really see those on our timeline very well. So it's almost more like we're animating, if I believe I'm right, that we're animating the deformation of this lattice over time. Okay, so if I just go ahead and go to frame 1, hit S with the lattice selected, I don't actually think it, let's see if I can change that and that works. There. Okay, so that didn't actually change it. So what we actually have to do is, instead of setting a keyframe on the full lattice, we set it on all the lattice points. So like we're animating these individual lattice points. So I hit S, and I go to frame 16, hit S again, and I move these around, and you'll see that over time we get that deformation. Okay. So hopefully that part makes sense. Again, I can select this and delete it, and we'll go back to this. Now this last one is a little harder to control, but it's actually really nice to get some sort of general animation. It's the jiggle deformer. So if I click on the jiggle deformer, first I have to have some vertices selected. So I'm going to grab just these in the center. All right. Let's go ahead and add a few more than that. There we go. And so if I add a jiggle deformer to that, It doesn't really look like anything happened. We didn't even get a new item here, but you'll see we have this jiggle on here. And if I animate from frame 1 to frame 16 of this object moving across the screen, and we play that back, we'll see some automatic animation going on there. Let's set this down to like 20. Let's set it closer to... Okay. Now the thing that is interesting is we'll see that it feels like it's going in front of it, which doesn't make sense because it's still traveling forward, right? But if you watch the very first frame, it actually travels backwards just for a frame, which is not very much, right? And then as it goes forward, it sort of throws it forward from that initial. So it's not very accurate. It's not extremely like physics driven. It's kind of just taking a vector and adjusting those. And so one of the things we can do is we can start adjusting the stiffness of this, and it'll feel a little bit better. I also sometimes will play around with these numbers. If we mess with them too much, we get some very weird results. Let's try that even higher. What about 10? Oh, I missed it, didn't I? One. Okay, and we can turn down this dampening a little bit too. Okay, so now it's starting to feel a little bit more like a 0.1. Let's turn it all the way down. There we go. Right. So now the thing about this is right now it's that big chunk right in the middle swaying back and forth, but like everything else, we can paint the weights on this. Right. And so what I'm just going to do is flood smooth that a little bit, soften it around the edges. And so now when we watch this, there we go. So it's interesting to watch. And so it's not great, but it's not bad either. And 7.5. There you go. We can play a little bit around with making it overall more jiggly. Okay, and so if we hit dampening to 3, that takes it to anyway, just play with it until you get the right amount of jiggle that you're going for. A lot of people use this for bellies on like chubbier characters or something like that. Okay, so I think there's one thing that we have to address on this, and that is the let me break these connections. This is the influence order, okay? And so break connections, edit, delete by type, history. Okay, so now it's just a normal object again. And so I can apply multiple deformers to it at the same time, right? So let's just do like a bend to this object and a squash. I'm going to add it to squash, right? And I'm just going to play with both of them. On the bend, I'm just going to turn the curvature up, and on the squash, I'm going to turn the factor up. Okay. Now, here's the thing: is I applied those in a specific order, and you'll see that the bend is lower than the squash. Right? If I right-click on this and I go to my and this is on the mesh, and I go to my inputs and choose all inputs, you'll see that this is the order in which it's going to apply these inputs to it. It's going to apply the squash on the top level and the bend next. If I middle click drag and drag the squash below the bend, we get a different result, right? And so this is very important when it comes to stuff like joints and blend shapes at the same time. The blend shape has to be applied after the joint. Okay, so let's show you an example of that. I'm just going to delete these two deformers. Go ahead and put a skeleton in this. Skeleton joint tool. X to snap. 4. Shift, 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 shift. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to do some animation on all these joints. Do S. And then rotate all of them. And maybe even move the base over to here, right? And so over 26 frames, we're going to get that, right? Now, let's apply the blend shape. So I'm just going to grab this, Control D. I have to unlock the duplicate and then move it. Okay, so let's say that this is the blend shape that I wanted to apply. All right. Yeah, I'm just going to do this as the blend shape. Okay. That. Create deformer blend shape. And so now, if I animate this blend shape over this time, now I don't think I showed you this earlier, but we can go to Window, Animation Editor, and Blend Shape, and we get this handy dandy blend shape animator here, right? And so I can key that on frame 1, and then go to frame 27, key that on frame 27, and that's probably what I was going for, right? Like I wanted that to happen. Now, if we have the orders different in this, let's see, inputs, all inputs, and the blend shape is above the skin cluster. So let's pull this skin cluster down below the blend shape. You see that what happens is the blend shape's propensity for keeping the vertices in their current location overrides this object trying to move them. And so now we get this, like, the skeleton sort of stops influencing it and the blend shape takes over. So we need the blend shape to happen first before the bone bends it. So I think I actually said that wrong earlier. Okay, so sometimes you're going to get weird deformation issues, and it may be in the input order that is causing that issue. So hopefully that makes sense. There are a couple other deformers in here that we didn't really talk about. There's the wire deformer and the wrap deformer. Wrap deformer is kind of interesting. It's basically having one object deform another object, but it's really slow, so we don't really use it a lot. So check those out and see if that's helpful at all, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.